Okay, welcome back to Snow's Chess Academy, Lesson 7, where we will continue with our basic mates as we began in Lesson 6. This time we're going to work with a king and a queen against a lone king. Now the strategy here is to take away squares from the king, drive it from the lone king, drive it to the rim, and bring about checkmate from there, watching out for a stalemate, of course, something we must always do when we've taken away many squares. Right now, I want you to picture the box around the king. Notice how the black queen controls the B file and the 7th rank. And this red king has way too much space to play in. So our first move is going to take away squares from the black king. Look how we just made this box a whole lot smaller. Okay? So all we needed to do is make the box a little smaller. Now the king, wanting to stay near the center, where it will be most difficult to checkmate, moves over to e4. Can you see the square that the black queen can move to make the box around the red king smaller? Well, hopefully you guessed c5. It's right there. Notice again, keep the shape of the box in mind. The box can be square or rectangular as long as you're making it smaller. Now, it's not always going to be possible to make the box smaller. For example, when the king moves over here, you'll notice that if the queen moves here, she makes the box a tiny bit smaller, but really she just changes the shape. If you cannot make the box smaller with the queen move, you must bring your king closer, which is something you're going to need to do anyway, because the queen on her own does not have enough firepower to checkmate the lone king all by herself. She needs the help of the king. All right, the red king comes up here, again pushing, but not able to step on the boundaries of the box. And the black king proceeds forward, getting what we call the opposition. The opposition is when there is an odd number of squares between the two kings and your king just moved. That means you have the opposition. All right, now the red king will continue its path. Notice, by the way, that although the red king has been repeating his moves, there will be no draw here because black has not been repeating his or her moves. So remember, a threefold repetition draw is only when both sides repeat moves. Now the black king steps in with much more powerful effect, actually stepping onto the border of the box himself, and the red king can no longer continue the pattern as before. The power of the queen on the diagonal takes away squares as well. All right, the red king must now move and give up space. And now I want you to take a look and see where the black queen can move to take away more squares and make the box smaller. Did you see the rather simple move? c4, queen to c4, there it is. Now the box has grown smaller. The king will now, in an attempt to stay away from the back rank, on which lies certain danger. Now, notice we can't bring our king any closer, but we wouldn't want to because we can make the box smaller. Notice, with the king assisting the queen. The black king defends the queen from the red king, and so now our box has grown smaller. The king moves this way. The black queen makes the box smaller again. And now white realizes that if he moves his king to g3, the queen will just follow to f4, so the red king tries a different tactic and moves the king back to f2. So although we cannot make the box immediately smaller, we can, of course, bring the king closer, getting the opposition again. And now the red king has the sorry necessity of having to move back to the back rank. There are, in fact, only 2 squares that the red king can choose from. The queen and king have tremendous complementary and co-work together. All right, the red king must go to the back rank. Now, once the king is on the back rank, our tactics change a little bit. Our job here is to trap the king on the back rank. It has helpfully moved there for us, but it had no choice but to move there. And we're going to see where can we move the queen to trap the king on the back rank. We're not so much concerned about the box being smaller at this point. We're much more concerned with trapping the king on the back rank. The queen moves to c2, putting the red king in a long, thin, rectangular box. This is just what you want to do, trapping the king on the first rank. So all we're going to need to do now is figure out a way to attack the king and control these other squares on the back rank. The black king moves in, keeping the opposition, controlling the 3 squares in front of the king. The red king only has 2 moves to choose from. We're going to move him in this case to e1, and black has 2 ways to checkmate here. He can engage in the in-your-face checkmate, where the queen gets right in the king's face, covers both squares on either side, defended by the king, and make checkmate. Or the queen can simply move down to c1, checkmating on the back rank with her power to control diagonal squares, a great help, and the king assisting by controlling e2 and f2. Now in this previous position, had the king chosen to move over to g1, can you find the checkmate? Where can the black queen go to give checkmate? It's another in-your-face checkmate with the queen moving to g2. All right, so remember, we make the box smaller. We bring the king closer. When we trap the king on the rim, we must be very careful not to lose the game by stalemate. For example, here black has an easy checkmate with queen to g2. However, were black still thinking about making the box smaller and to move the queen here, white would be deliriously happy having a draw by stalemate. Notice the king is not in check, but cannot legally move to any square. All right, let's take a look at checkmating with a king and a rook. We're going to utilize some of the exact same principles here. We're going to make the box smaller with the rook move. We're going to bring the king closer. If we cannot make the box smaller, we're going to trap the king on the rim, and yes, we're going to watch out for stalemate. We will possibly run into a little problem here where we cannot make the box smaller or bring the king closer, in which case we will have to make a waiting move. Waiting moves are fine as long as they force your opponent to make an inferior move. So here we have our box. Take a look at the rook's ability to control the file and the rank. The rook swings down to e4, making the box, in fact, really taking the red king down to just the whole quadrant of the board. The king moves away. Notice the rook cannot safely move to f4 to make the box smaller or the king would capture, so the black king simply moves to e5. The red king comes over to f3. Now, there's a wonderful German saying, Patzer sees check, Patzer makes check. You don't want to give a check just because you can. Were we to check here, the king would leap into a larger box. Do not chase your opponent into a larger box. No, that's a mistake. What we're going to do here is simply bring the king closer and get the opposition. All right. The king knows that should he move to g3, the black rook will simply come to f4 and make the box smaller. So he goes south, down to f2. The black king comes forward, getting the opposition. The king goes to g2, not wanting to go on the rim. And the black rook steps forward once again, making the box around the king smaller. Now we're going to come across another scenario where the side with the extra rook often messes up. The king moves to f2, and now black cannot bring the king any closer, and he cannot make the box smaller. And this is usually a situation where the side with the king and the rook, if they don't know what they're doing, will not be able to make progress. However, we can make a safe waiting move with the black king. We're going to move the black king over here. Notice this did not give the red king any extra space to move to. The red king must now move away from the rook, which is just what we want, and the rook swings over to f3, making the box smaller. Now the king must go to the back rank. Black can't make the box small with the rook move. He brings the king closer. The red king happily comes off the back rank. The black king comes closer. Now the king comes to h2. And we must be very careful about stalemate. We're going to trap the king on the rim, just as we know we should do with king and queen and king and 2 rooks. And we've trapped the king on the rim. However, fortunately, we've left the king 1 move, so we don't need to worry about a draw yet. The king moves into the corner. Now, black can really ruin the game here by bringing the king to h3, and suddenly we have a draw by stalemate. Notice that the black king moves to h3. There is no legal move for white to make. So we're going to bring the king closer over here to f3. The red king moves up to h2, the only legal move. The black king moves closer. Closest is when we have the opposition. We're directly opposite. King has only 1 move here. Now once again, now that the king is trapped on the rim, black could blow it with a stalemate by moving the rook to g2. A tragedy. White gets a draw by stalemate. The king's not in check and cannot move. Instead, however, black sees the simple checkmate by sliding the rook to h3, giving checkmate, wonderfully assisted by the king, who covers both g2 and g1. So, to remember for checkmating with a king and queen against a king, or a king and rook against a lone king, the concept of the geometric shapes of box, whether it's rectangle or square, make that box smaller, avoid useless checks. If you can't make the box smaller, you bring the king closer. Once you've got your opponent's king trapped on the rim, watch out for stalemate, and of course, watch out for checkmate. It may be right there for you. Take the time, study at least 3 different moves, look for the very best one, and don't ever get lazy when you're ahead. It can be just as easy for your opponent to draw if they are being very, very aware and you are not. So, thanks so much for watching this lesson on Basic Mates.